When we think of scientific breakthroughs, we picture a lone genius hunched over glowing flasks, one discovery away from changing the world. But that's not how science works. It's not a solo act, it's a symphony. Real breakthroughs happen in teams, with support flowing from both in and out of the lab. For many of us, the real challenge isn't the science, it's navigating the systems. When I first entered STEM as a Black immigrant woman, I thought the hardest part would be mastering scientific techniques or being smart enough to understand complex experiments. I was wrong. The hardest part was navigating the parts tied to my identity, the invisible walls no one told me were there. It was community that brought me to success. Not a networking org or LinkedIn connections, but a real community. One built over time and rooted in trust and shared experiences. I remember the semester that I took biostats and molecular biology and how inspired I was by those two fields to advance human health. I needed to learn more. I wanted to contribute. My professor suggested that I look into summer undergraduate research programs. Wonderful opportunities for students to get hands-on research experience and maybe even publish their work. So I went looking, and I found countless opportunities at North Carolina's research institutions. I had the grades, I had the coursework, I had the letters of support, but there was one requirement that made me ineligible for all of them. Must be U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Because of where I was born, something I had no choice in, by the way, I simply couldn't apply. But I couldn't let that stop me. See, by nature of being other, I had already been building my community of people with shared experiences, mentors I could be vulnerable with, people I could trust with my story. So when I went back to my professors and my friends, my community, they offered idea after idea of how to get around this hurdle. Finding non-federally funded opportunities, stories of other non-citizens who found a way, and even doing it unpaid. I took in all of these strategies and ended up graduating with research experience from North Carolina Central University, NC State, the Museum of Natural Sciences, and even a biotech company. Some of these experiences I did concurrently, and some unpaid. If it weren't for the support of my community, not just in finding those opportunities, but supporting me through them, I probably would have had to work a full-time job on top of them just to put gas in my car or have food to eat. This was one of the first of many barriers I had to and still have to overcome in STEM. The biggest problem with these barriers are that most of them are hidden, woven into the culture of science and research, and rarely discussed openly. So when we come up against them, not ever being told how to prepare for them or that they even exist, we feel like we're the only ones with this issue. And eventually, we start to believe that we are the problem. Studies show that gender bias in STEM shows up in quiet, everyday ways, like a perceived lack of technical ability. Our ideas are overlooked. We feel like we have to keep proving ourselves, and sometimes we're even mistaken for admin or custodial staff. I've been there. I can't count the number of times I've seen that surprised look in someone's face when they finally care to ask what my background's in. And I tell them, my PhD is in computational biology and bioinformatics, and I'm studying the genomic risk factors of health and disease. I like to think that they're shocked because of how young I look. But I know it's more than that. I'm often one of the few Black women in these spaces. And when they don't expect you to be there, they make up assumptions about why you are. Studies have shown that gender bias in STEM can show up like having lower acceptance rates in papers. 16% of women are less likely to get grant funding, and 20 to 40% of women are 20 to 40% less likely to be invited as conference speakers at major conferences. All of these are key criteria for promotion in STEM. And these biases don't just show up at work, they follow us home. One study showed that 43% of women fail to return to the workforce after having a child, even after 5 years. And honestly, how could they? How is a working mom supposed to justify the rising cost of childcare, the non-alignment of school and work hours, and constantly having to prove herself just to be overlooked? I'm lucky in some ways. My work is behind the computer, so I have a bit more flexibility. But if it weren't for the support of my family and my community, being a mom and a scientist would feel impossible. If I had an event, needed to work late, too busy to cook, my community of family and friends are always ready to step in. That kind of guaranteed support makes all the difference, not just in showing up for work, but continuing to grow in a field that's constantly evolving. And it wasn't just parenting. My community has supported me throughout my STEM journey. One day in class, I saw someone wearing a shirt with the logo of the scholarship I was in the middle of applying to. And because of my citizenship status, this was one of a handful of scholarships I was even eligible for. I saw our shared experiences, not based on how we look, but on a t-shirt. I knew I had to introduce myself. So I stopped her after class to ask about her shirt, and when she realized what I was really asking about, her eyes brightened with excitement, and she immediately took me under her wing. That night, she and some friends she recruited stayed up with me strategizing and practicing interview questions. Because I dared to be vulnerable, that community helped me to get this scholarship, which allowed me to graduate college debt-free. I continued to seek out community throughout my STEM journey. It was my immigrant community that got me into research. Women mentors that showed me real examples of how to balance life and work, like extending a conference trip into a family vacation. Later on, I found broader communities, like the Black Women in Computational Biology Network, where I saw how my peers were navigating this field. Like women working towards being CEOs and pursuing patent law for gene therapies. These communities weren't just feel-good spaces. They offered strategy, insight, and vision. They made the invisible barriers visible and reminded me that the problem isn't me. It's that these systems weren't built for people like me, but together we can find a way through. And this isn't just my story. Research shows that isolation is one of the biggest barriers for women in STEM, and 70% of women cite mentorship and community as reasons for their success. Communities, they help you to see new possibilities, whether that's learning from a peer on an alternate path or getting guidance from someone further along. A friend of mine experienced this firsthand. Early in her career, she told me it felt like she was starting 2 new jobs at once: motherhood and being a scientist. Little pockets of community kept her afloat. Her lab mates would drive her to work when she was feeling too sick during pregnancy. Colleagues would bring her food, even one woman who held her baby at a talk while she was at a conference. At the time, her advisor told her that without this specific grant, she would never become a professor, a role that she'd been working towards for years. Without that grant, she left academia for biotech, a path that felt more sustainable. But years later, she discovered the Black and microbiology community, where she saw scientists like herself thriving in academia, even without that make-or-break grant her advisor insisted on. That community gave her the confidence to return to academia, proving that with the right support, possibilities become realities. By now, I hope I've convinced you that being in community matters. A real community isn't a Slack channel. It's not LinkedIn connections. It's a group of people who share your values, your goals, and who you trust enough to be vulnerable with. Right now, it's harder than ever to build community. We've learned isolation from the pandemic, and now we're seeing community-centered programs defunded, DEI efforts rolled back, and support networks dismissed as extra. But for many of us, community isn't extra, it's essential. So for those of you building your STEM career, don't just collect contacts. Be intentional and build a kind of community that sees you, supports you, and stays with you. Share little pockets of support, like a "you've got this" text before a big presentation. And most importantly, tell your story. That's how we connect and how we spot those hidden barriers early. For mentors and educators, don't just teach the science. Teach how to survive the systems that run the science. And for institutions, now is the time to be bold and creative. Find ways to invest into spaces where people can show up as their full selves, even if the language has to change, even if the support looks different. Stay committed in sustaining an environment where everyone has a chance to succeed. Just as scientific discoveries are rarely achieved in isolation, individual success also needs a team. Because there's no guidebook for all the barriers we'll face, but in community, we can navigate them, and maybe we can get rid of them for the next person coming through. In community, we get perspective, we gain strategy, and we keep going. Thank you.